Welcome to the Unlist. Now I know a full-length video about Paco, Rabanne, Invictus is the last thing you'd expect to come from a channel like this. But this fragrance does have a very interesting, mostly untold story. There's been a few articles about it. For granted, a couple other blog sites have made mention of this particular untold story. But I feel like my channel is the perfect one to actually do something about that and actually tell that untold story, because I like to think people who watch my channel are into that sort of stuff. I mean, the average person who uses Paco, Rabanne, Invictus probably doesn't care. As long as it smells fresh, lasts a long time, gets them compliments, right, does what it's basically designed to do, their concern begins and ends there. And then, of course, there are going to be a lot of people in the online fragrance community who don't really care about the backstory because they hate the fragrance, right? It's everywhere, super ubiquitous, very popular, it's a bestseller, and they smell it so much, it's not even sure whether they're smelling the actual fragrance or one of its many flankers or one of its even greater number of imitators, right? It's like BR 540 just done to death. So the last thing they want to know is how it came about, the behind-the-scenes stuff, to a fragrance they can't escape, right? They don't care. But there's a small percentage, very small percentage, of people who kind of are betwixt two worlds. They like niche and vintage and artisanal stuff, and they're collectors and they're all into genres and all that, perfumers and history. Then the people who also like compliments, or maybe just want something that's easy to wear, you know, something that's kind of just a throw on, smell good, a daily driver, if you will. And then there are people that are like in the middle, and I consider myself to be one of those few who are in the middle, where we do like our grooming style fragrances. We know we do like our wet shaving stuff. We like our easy fresh fougères and our aquatics and our various ambroxan style things. We also love all the niche and all the vintage and all the artisanal and the naturals and all the avant-garde stuff too. But every so often there's an itch that needs to be scratched, and it can't be scratched by a more strange fragrance. It can only be scratched by something that's basic but satisfying, like a cheeseburger, right? And every now and then that cheeseburger ends up being Paco, Rabanne, Invictus, or Bleu de Chanel, or Sauvage, or any number of similar popular fragrances. And that's okay. You're allowed to be that person, because I'm that person, and I'm telling you that you're allowed to be that person too if you want. It's all right to be a Creed lover or a lover of discontinued Balenciaga fragrances, but every so often also like to wear Invictus or Sauvage or whatever. It's not a cardinal sin, people. So for those of you out there who this applies, this story is for you. This is the often untold story of Paco, Rabanne, Invictus. The weird stuff about the fragrance that once I tell you, you won't be able to unsmell it, okay? So let's get started. First things first, what we know about the fragrance, what most people in the world know about the fragrance. It's very loud. It's not the sweetest thing in the world, but it is quite sweet. It is what we jokingly refer to as a bubblegum shower gel fragrance. Other YouTube content creators have also made those jokes too, even though they're pushing the fragrance onto you, which is a bit of a conflict of interest there, but I don't know. I'm not going to judge on that. The fragrance itself comes in a very, well, special kind of bottle. This says a lot about the personality of the guy who you find this sitting on their dresser, right? This is the only fragrance they own, but this is what's on their dresser. Kind of tells you a bit about them. You know, whether you want to hang around the morning after or get the fastest Uber you can out of there, right? I'm gonna leave that up to you to decide. That's not my thing. But those of us who have large collections, we can hide this bottle behind others, so we're good. We don't have to worry about anyone judging us for our tacky bottles of Paco, Rabanne, who have actually always done tacky bottles. Even the old stuff from the 80s, people don't think about that normally. But yeah, you go back to the 80s, La Nuit was a tacky bottle. Tenere was a tacky bottle. Some of the different versions of the original Paco, Rabanne Pour Homme were tacky bottles too. I like some of the older ones with the big old sticker on the front, but I admit they do look kind of tacky. Compared to other bottles from the 70s, other bottles from the 80s, they were a bit tacky. But that's kind of why you love the brand, right? Paco Rabanne is very much wears the heart on the sleeve. They don't try to be sophisticated or try to be refined. They're just like, nope, big old R right on the bottle. Or in this case, big old trophy cup. Just, we don't care. Either you like it or you don't. And, you know, there's a bit of honesty, I guess, to that too, in some ways. But this video isn't about the packaging of Paco Rabanne. This video is about the making of this particular fragrance. So let's get back on track. So the thing about Invictus that not a lot of folks know, it's a multi-perfumer fragrance, which is not so uncommon nowadays. Because these days, everything goes through focus groups and mood boards, and typically when an oil company, like an IFF or a Givaudan or someone, wins a brief, they put all their top perfumers on it. They decide to dogpile it with talent, especially if it's going to be a big seller. If they expect a big seller, they will break out all the big guns. They won't leave it up to one person. No matter what the reputation of that one person is, they won't leave it up to them. They'll just empty out the whole team on that fragrance. That's kind of what they did here. But originally, when this brief first slid across the desk, it was given to just one perfumer. One perfumer who would ultimately not even be credited for the fragrance, which is kind of bizarre. But originally, this was Annick Menardo's assignment. And, you know, she's done some things in the mainstream space. Most of her career actually is spent in that space. Going all the way back to things like CKB for Calvin Klein in the late 90s. But Annick Menardo was assigned to do a black olive accord for a fragrance for Paco Rabanne. And, you know, olives in general are a hard thing to really visualize in fragrant form because there's so many complexities to an olive, not including how you decide to treat it, whether you're going to preserve it in brine or you're going to just have it raw, right? So if you're going for more of like a jarred olive with like a salty brine, you've got to take that salt into consideration too, along with the typical umami and earthiness of a black olive, the fattiness because, you know, they press oil out of them, and other sort of delicate, waxy, rubbery flavors that come along for the ride with the olive. You manage to master all of that and make an actual accord that can somehow be shaped into a fragrance. Well, that's kind of impressive, isn't it? You wouldn't think. That'd be pretty hard. You know, it's not like a rose where we've had centuries of time to develop that, you know, or lavender, centuries of experience with messing with lavender oils. So the thing is, the black olive accord became the focus of a fragrance. Originally, it was going to be a citrus aromatic fragrance with the black olive accord in it. I guess some kind of aquatic thing, some kind of cologne sort of thing. Mediterranean theme because olives, right? Ha ha ha. But it just didn't test well. It was too niche, right? And Paco Rabanne is not really a brand you think of to do very niche fragrances. I mean, Parfum d'Empire, you know, Diptyque with their fig fragrances, you know, all these other niche brands that charge $200, $300 a bottle, they'll do something like a black olive fragrance because they have the kind of audience for that. Paco Rabanne does not. So they were like, okay, you succeeded, you tackled the brief, but now we've decided this is not marketable for us. We no longer want this as it is. So then, I guess to avoid the whole contract being dumped out, right, and all that money being wasted, they took the thing away from Annick Menardo and they handed it over to a cabal of perfumers, which ended up being Anne Filippo, Dominique Ropion, pretty big name there, Veronique Nyberg, semi-big name there, and then of course the big one is Olivier Polge, son of Jacques Polge, who would eventually take over his father's place at Chanel, but not back in 2012. 2013, he was still a free agent. He was still with Givaudan, who, by the way, Givaudan had this brief. That's who was working on this. So Annick Menardo didn't even get credited for her work, even though she technically invented the core accord that the entire fragrance is wrapped around. So here's what happened. That black olive accord remained, but kept getting reduced and reduced and reduced and reduced. And the other perfumers who were put on the assignment continued to build a more mainstream fragrance on top of this accord. It's actually kind of sad, really, what happened to it. But it basically just got so processed effectively and affected by, again, these mood boards, these focus groups, these marketing accountant egghead types. Yeah, egg hell. It is egg hell, though, right? It is a hell full of eggs. But these corporate ghouls, which is the bane of existence, are the corporate ghouls, the shareholders, the billionaires who are detached from the human condition. They ruin everything, right? All of us artistic folks who have a love for life, we get oppressed by these soulless liches and mummy lords that rest atop us and suck all value out of society, like gigantic parasites, gigantic ticks like they are, sucking us dry, taking all humor and, you know, just anything that instills any kind of heart, and just suck it right out and replace it with numbers and money and material and shallow vanity and all that lovely dystopian stuff. So eventually it just came down the pipe that this fragrance needs to be more and more mass appealing according to the numbers, right? So I've done my video already on what is mass appeal, how mass appeal is a bit of a contradiction since you're selling a fragrance, right? I'm going to recap a little bit from that video. You're selling a fragrance at a very high price point, meant to be exclusive, not to be ubiquitous, not to be proletariat or hoi polloi, not to be something that is for the masses. You don't want the masses to have this fragrance. You price it and you sell it in exclusive locations to keep it away from the masses, but yet you want it mass appealing at the same time. You want the largest population of person on earth to enjoy the fragrance, but you're not going to give them access to it. So what's the point, right? You can make more money by actually democratizing a fragrance like that, by making it cheaper and more available. I mean, hell, entire brands made their whole career out of doing that for decades until that suddenly was no longer a thing. So in this case, that hypocritical sense of mass appeal, in a sense, really defined this fragrance. That olive accord, which is still there, it's still there, but it got buried on top of the ethyl maltol, the fruity tones, the juniper that's in this fragrance. There are a lot of aquatic notes in here. There's actually a fairly interesting ambergris accord floating around in this, and I think they leaned on the saltiness of the olive accord and then built out from that saltiness with some mineral notes. Used the ambroxan to replicate that transparent fresh lift that ambergris has. They put the bay leaf in there to make it more like a, you know, a Caribbean style tropicoid. It kind of folds back into that whole fresh thing, right? But that bubblegummy sweetness and that sort of shower gel aspect that really defines the core experience of this fragrance would ultimately just kind of take a boot to the face of that black olive accord effectively. And like I said, it's there, but you kind of have to go like this. But now that you know it's there, right, next time you smell Invictus, you're going to be like, let me look for it. And you're going to single it out, and you're going to say, there it is. And you're going to go, that's weird, because no other mainstream mass appeal fragrance on the market sold for men has anything quite like that. And it's that one weird little defining X factor of Invictus that makes it different from all of its other clones, even its other flankers, because Invictus Aqua, both versions, not there. Invictus Victory, not there. Any of the other Parfum flankers or Intense flankers, again, not there. You only find that black olive accord in the original 2013 Invictus. And it is created by a perfumer who is not credited. The fifth Beatle, if you will, because there were 4 noted perfumers. Again, Veronique Nyberg, Dominique Ropion, Olivier Polge, and Filippo. So, you know, Paul, Ringo, John, and George, right? Well, that fifth Beatle is Enric Minardo, who ironically started the whole thing, but gets no credit. And it's kind of sad in a way. But it does make the fragrance marginally more interesting. If you are someone who likes niche fragrances and you like weird off-kilter fragrances, but you also like your easy-to-wear stuff, like I said, you like your office-style scents, you might occasionally go, let me give this a spin. Now, of course, it's still going to be primarily a fruity, youthful, bubblegummy, fresh, clean, day at the mall, let's go to a movie, right, kind of a fragrance. You're not getting around that. This is not sophisticated or refined. Never was, never will be. I mean, look at it, right? It can't be. It just can't be. But knowing it has that origin does make it kind of cool. And as a bit of a segue, if you want to smell more of what Invictus could have been, there is another fragrance I can recommend to you. It's much more expensive fragrance, though. And it's from one of those luxury, fly-by-night luxury brands, the ones that pop up. You know the ones. They pop up with a full line of like 20 fragrances all ready to go. And they're like, here's our brand, and here's the whole range. And they're all like $300, $400, $500, like your Royal Crowns, like your Morning Chasses, or Mind Games, or whatever. Those kind of brands, they just kind of come out of nowhere with this big range of fragrances, and they're all expensive, and most of them smell like something you've already smelled before, like the House of Sillage men's range, for instance, popped up with like 6 of them right, at the onset. Here you go. And you're just like, okay, this is another way of just sucking money out of rich people, dumb rich people. Oh, look, this looks cool. $400, I'll take it. And one such brand is, unfortunately, called Electimus. And I am not trying to personally take a crap on the founders of the brand, because I know one of the things they say is they want high-quality niche fragrances to be accessible for all, and they could charge a lot more for their fragrances, right? But they want to keep them accessible, so they only charge $300 only. Oh, only $300. That's a deal, man. Oh gosh, I'm only $200 more away from a bottle of Creed at that point, and I'm like $50 away from Parfum de Marly if I really wanted it. It's not really a deal, guys. Not really a deal. I mean, yeah, I guess they're all supposed to be Parfum Extrait, so they're all really potent. So if you look at the potency, maybe it's a little more worth the money. But then you look at all the packaging with the metal over the bottles and the big emblem and the heavy caps, and you're like, hey, I don't know, man. This whole it's niche for everyone kind of a thing. I mean, if you cut $100 off of that, made it $200, I might go, okay. Now you're a little bit above Diptyque, okay? You're a little bit above a brand like that. Then I could say more reasonable. Still not the average person, but a little more reasonable. However, if you're willing to explore the Electimus range, they have a fragrance that reminds me of the original concept of Paco Rabanne Invictus. I've even mentioned that in my written review for that fragrance. And it's called Black Caviar. If you manage to get your hands on Black Caviar by Electimus, you will smell a much more stark, naked interpretation of that black olive accord. Now, the perfumers are listed somewhere on the Electimus webpage, but it's not Annick Minardo, so I don't believe it's her actual black olive accord that was taken and put into the fragrance. I think it was just somebody with GCMS machine and a little bit of creativity to, change things around a bit. It's someone taking it and then doing, playing it by ear, like when you learn a song off the radio. Somebody who goes, okay, let's do this. We don't have access to the formula. Let's do this, right? So they kind of made a semblance of this black olive accord, but then they built a much more naked fragrance around it. It's got lavender, it's got leather, it's a fougere basically still. It's not just black olive in a bottle, but the accord is much stronger and more prevalent. And if you close your eyes and squint a little bit, you can kind of go, this is what Invictus could have been. Except not $300, but this is what Invictus could have been if it had not been shot down and then sent to the cleaners, right, for rearranging. So there you guys have it, the untold story of Paco Rabanne Invictus. Once again, I mean the original fragrance, all of its flankers are exempt from this conversation. And last but not least, if you are curious about my bottle, it's not a deep vintage. I mean, I know the fragrance is like 11 years old now, but this is a relatively new bottle, or at least I think it's new. You can't really tell with these how old the bottle is because they all look the same, and at least in my opinion, all smell the same. But I do know that mine's a tester. And the way you know a tester from a retail bottle is, retail bottle has Invictus on the cap, but nothing else. This is just glass. But the tester bottles put Invictus on the front too, because they figure you're an idiot in a store looking at fragrances. They got to put it on the front of the bottle just so you know what it is. But if you were to buy this retail, it probably wouldn't say that on the front. It would just say it up here. All right, guys. That's been the video. Hopefully you enjoyed it. Whether or not you like the fragrance, doesn't matter. Just a little cool anecdotal story for you. Catch you next time.